Hi, everybody. Philosophy, Society, Killers, Justice. This is October 18th, 2023. We're in the Toronto Metropolitan University Library. So quick review. Basically, the way that it works is this facet of the organization and theoretical thing that I've been creating for the past over 10 years is a way, one end of it is like eudaimonia, or to live a good life. And we can learn to do this on our own, or we can do it as a group. And humans learn much more effectively in groups, especially under certain contexts. That's why universities are built with classrooms and these kinds of things. So in some ways, it's an open discussion. I'm usually leading a topic in somewhat of a semi-quasi lecture format, but then you guys can jump in at any point in time. And then what I'm doing is I'm implementing the practical application of the content to whatever we talk about or the information we've been going through. So I texted both of you guys the last week's meeting. I have a social media marketing manager. Basically, I have people that live with me and I indirectly teach them how to live a good life by example. So even if I make a mistake, being responsible for that mistake is part of what it means to be a healthy person in a community and to be a leader of how to deal with the human condition. Because being human is quite overwhelming at certain points. This format of what we're doing here is a way for us to discuss ideas and understand things in more of an intellectual format. And the history of philosophy, have you guys taken any philosophy classes?
I did, but
like they weren't affiliated with like our universities. Like,
okay.
Kind of online.
Okay. Philosophy in its discipline since, the early modern and medieval ages for sure. So part of the discipline of philosophy has been predominantly, so now I'll start distinguishing things, which traditionally is defined as the love of wisdom. And one major branch of this concept of the love of wisdom, more focused on what wisdom means, has been a methodology of reasoning, specifically with certain concepts or beliefs. And so the ancient Greeks talk about certain conceptual ideas that for thousands of years we've been discussing what these things mean, right? But is that the only facet of wisdom? And many people would say, I would say, I'm going to say no, okay? And the other facet is more of a practical method, which is focused on like how we live our lives. And some of the most important parts of this is like decision-making, judgment, and many other elements of that. So already with the two properties that I've put under like eudaimonia, how we live our lives, it's heavily psychological. Decision-making is a psychological process, something you do with your mind, right? Judgments is again a psychological process. The way I understand philosophy, and many will disagree in the university predominantly because their paradigm is fixated on this method of reasoning only, right? And so what the philosopher almost becomes a joke in some ways. You say, what do you do for a living? I'm a philosopher. You make money at that, right? Many people have laughed at me over the years for this, which is totally fine because it makes sense that it's funny because it's not something that you would think has any real practical application. It's more like if you even say the science of debating, which is sure, it's fine. Like many people become lawyers or whatever else after. I would say that something is missing, right? From what philosophy as a discipline or a cultural movement or a social group or an organization can offer to the individual, everyone in the room, and just society in general, right? Now, the alternative approach, what humans have done, is they've developed religion that has some kind of deity, and there's like a scripture that kind of dictates this is what you do, and then there's all the people that believe in it, right? And then they do those things. The problem is that there's many facets of religion and they get into conflict, like the Israel-Palestinian recent thing that the world has to, bear witness to. The problem with the religious perspective, there are some benefits to it. Like it gives you some sense of what the afterlife is. You got some kind of moral compass. You have this sense of community, right? Those are all good things, sure, right? As long as it works, right? We get existence of cults, like the Solar Temple cult, where they were persuaded to drink this Kool-Aid, and then what happened? Ooh, they all died. Right? It was like a suicide cult. Super not cool, right? So just because it's a social group that is going towards some end doesn't necessarily mean it's good. Or the existing conflict with Hamas, killing people and both sides suffering because of this, and the poor management of that conflict, right? That's just not good. So what is the thing that we can use to understand religion? Well, it would be philosophy. You don't use religion to understand religion because it becomes circular. Philosophy, however, we talk about this process and then content, right? So process is like how we reason about things, or again, how we live our lives, right? So like meditation, for example. Emotional management, learning how to deal with how we feel, how we be in the frame. And content would be like, does God exist? Or is it ethical to bomb this nuclear facility? Yes.
So just a clarification, is it to say that you view religion as a facet of philosophy?
No, it's not a facet.
Or a
Like,
branch?
no, it wouldn't. It would be a subject that philosophy can. There could be the philosophy of religion, but it's like a subject on its own.
So we can say that religion can be explained using philosophy.
Yes.
You can't explain religion using religion itself.
It just becomes weird at some point, because then if I'm Muslim, then how would I explain Hinduism? I can't really, because I would explain it through the framework of being Muslim, right? But so it's like, if you think of like we have a pair of glasses, right? And it's the way that we see the world. And if the glasses have like a little bit of shit on it, it distorts how you see the world a little bit. You're out and you're just like being super awesome during the day, and then the bug hits you in the fucking thing. I drive a car, so sometimes there's stuff. And it blocks your view. Or when I first bought this car, there was literally a crack directly in my field of view. And I called the guy. I was like, dude, you just sold me a $30,000 vehicle, and there's a crack in the windshield directly in the driver's view. I was like, how do you do that? Right? That marks your integrity. This is like our paradigm. Or you could say, like we use other terms, we'll choose paradigm for that. And so if I have a religious paradigm or viewpoint, if the way I look at the world is through Hinduism, right? These are my glasses. And then I want to view Islam, I would be understanding Islam through a Hinduistic perspective. Well, that doesn't make sense. Philosophy is supposed to be at this level. This is more the reasoning methodology part, right? And what we're doing is we're using things like logic, right? Or critical thinking. And critical thinking is the evaluation of beliefs, claims, and evidence to determine their soundness and how they make sense, right? And so it's not about me making Islam fit within Hinduism or using Hindu properties or concepts to understand Islam. Or you could even talk about like a historical framework, right? Which is just like the history of the world, and like Islam is like right there, Hinduism's down here somewhere, as like a chronological understanding or the way that socially things have developed. Sure. But we kind of want to have glasses or a lens that doesn't have anything on it. So I can unbiasedly understand the nature of the thing, whatever that thing may be, right? And so last week, Behzad had this ball of, intellectual vigor and threw it on the ground. And what happened? We had a discussion about current events in the world. And what can we do to evaluate the integrity of those events? How do we make sense of them? That's part of this philosophical understanding. We could talk about judgment, for example. How do I judge this? Like, what does this mean? Whatever this thing is, right? What I'm really just saying is that philosophy is the biggest thing. It is the meta thing that you utilize all the time to make sense of whatever is going on, right? And we can make sense of and religion or ethics, that goes into like the academic area, right? What is justice? What is art? What is beauty? What is the right thing to do, right? And we can talk about that. But then there's, what is going on in my life? How do we live together? Which is tied into it. And we could talk about how the current conflict with Israel-Palestine, There's things going on, right? That's our group here isn't about like, I think it's important for any facilitator. So if there are many philosophy societies like this one, which is the plan in the future, right? That the person standing here has training in philosophy, so they understand this stuff. But the content, what we do when we're here, is not actually focused on that. You can take the courses at the university for that, right? But when you come here, we're going to work on this stuff. How do you live your life? Now, you good?
Just a thought.
I see it. Throw it out there. Throw it in the fire. Let's make it nice and warm in here.
You had mentioned that you use philosophy to make sense of everything around us.
Mhm.
Can it be applied to everything in life? I mean, for example, you look at a painting or a piece of music, can you use philosophy to evaluate the level of beauty of a painting or not, or music? How do we use philosophy to evaluate that?
So philosophy used for, one, making sense of things or ideas. Number two would be, so you're talking about an experience. You're talking about an experience, like the experience of a piece of art, a painting. In this sense, I would say maybe not so much, like being in the thing. Philosophy may lead you there. It may give you some structure to it, like it might give you some kind of a glasses to apply to the thing itself, to understand it a little bit better. Like pay attention to this. Like when you see the movie, this is what's important. You're like, oh, okay. And you know what to look for. You're like, all right, when I'm fishing, like I know how to do it a little bit.
The reason I bring up the question is because I wonder if instead of philosophy, when you are looking at a painting in a museum and you are trying to appreciate it, does something else, do we put on a different pair of spectacles? Do we look at it through using something else? That's, I guess, what I'm trying to ask.
You can be philosophical about that, but that a professional artist may say that that's not what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Right? Like for example, when you look at those like optical illusion images, and you have to like let your eyes relax, and then you see like another image, which I'm not really good at at all. I suck at doing that. But you're not supposed to be critical and look at the detail. You're supposed to actually let your eyes like defocus, and then some other image appears out of it that you can't see if you use your center vision. So being philosophical in that sense may take away from the experience, right? And even if we think about the brain, right? So our little potato brain thing here. If you're using your prefrontal cortex, which is where your philosophical ingenuity is going to come from predominantly, you may not be fully in the experience, And like, as someone who studied philosophy for a long time, this is like almost a bad thing for me. It's like a double-edged sword. Like I'm too philosophical sometimes. All right, now, bad time. Right?
Well, some studies have actually shown, for example, that different brain waves, I can't really name all of them, for example, theta, beta, etc.
Okay.
They've seen that when your brain is in a state of, when you're just awakening from a slumber, that wave, whatever frequency that is that your brain is functioning in, is the most optimal for learning new things. So sometimes if you are too concentrated on something in front of you, it may actually be an impediment to absorbing the information.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm just trying to make a parallel with what you're talking about, but using too much philosophy perhaps sometimes may take away from the experience.
Yeah, for sure. And then maybe that might not be the place for it. Maybe you're not supposed to make sense of that. You're supposed to experience it. It's like when I'm drinking the coffee, I'm not like analyzing my gastrointestinal processes. And I'm like, is that what, and I'm like feeling it. And I'm like, and the chemicals breaking down this way. And like, I'm just like, oh, this is great coffee. It's not burnt. It's like, I had coffee recently and I was like, oh, fuck, it's burnt. It sucks. And I'm already too far away to like, I don't want to complain about it. I got shit to do. I'm just going to drink this burnt coffee. Or when you watch a movie, right? The purpose, like when you're watching a movie, they have this thing called dispelling disbelief. Like, it's a movie. You're like, yeah, Arnold Schwarzenegger's really not killing Predator. Predator is not a real thing, right? Like that alien they found in Mexico. So Neil deGrasse Tyson's like, I respect the fact that whoever brought this and the Mexican government, right, at least put forward these aliens, right? Have you seen them?
Yes.
Super fun. You see this? Yeah. Okay. It was like ceramic. It was like someone did paper mache, and they're like, here, like some high school kid made these aliens, and then their dad was like, no, let's just take it over there and make it look like it's a thing, which is fine. But at least Neil deGrasse Tyson was like, at least we can be empirical and test it. Whereas in the United States government, they're like, okay, well, there's this mysterious unknown thing in this dark place that no one can go to, and no one's allowed to see it, you know, and but it exists. And it's like, okay, well, you give me nothing to work with here. But even though, like, one of the main criticisms that Neil deGrasse Tyson makes is that when you look at a mummified person, right, from like thousands of years ago, their nose isn't there because there's no bone where your nose is. It's just cartilage. So after all the flesh and that material decays away, there's a hole. You look at a skull, there's a big hole right here. But getting punched in the nose sucks. You know, it would have been better if we evolved with the bone there, because then you just like take it. It wouldn't hurt so much. You wouldn't break your nose as easily, right? So when you look at these papier-mâché aliens, they have a nose still. And he's like, that's such a peculiar thing because everywhere on our planet, like humanoid beings don't have that. So it doesn't make sense. And also how similar these aliens are to humans, right? They're like almost modeled off of human beings. Whereas if you listed all of the species on the planet, there's a lot of them. And how many of them resemble humans? Like such a small fraction. And that's on our planet. So to say that's like, you know, you're on Earth, okay? And if you're on like some other planet, and the similarity of this being to human beings is like 99%, is just like, really? Okay, maybe. And so the point is at least there's a physical object that now we can test. So his example was when the United States went to the moon, they like grabbed a bunch of dirt and they're like, all right. And they went back to Earth. They're like, okay, look at all the stuff I found. And then they gave it to everybody. Like, it's real. Here you go. You can have some. And with that's the scientific process. It's not just me saying there's this elephant out there that doesn't make any sound. You can't see it, but it's really there. And you just got to believe me. And if you don't, there's going to be consequences. Right? That's what goes back to this thing. If you believe anything else, I'm going to come down on you real hard. Right? Well, if it was really true, just show me, man. Come on, just give me a little bit here. Right? And so when it comes to that specific thing, right? At least we can be empirical about it. I don't know why I got on this tangent, but I did. So, okay, logic and critical thinking. So the experience of painting. When you watch the video, like, oh, that's why I was talking about the aliens or so on. When you're in the experience, this is the application of science, I think, is what I'm trying to say. When you're in the experience, it's about being in the experience, right? And not being analytical. And so part of it, we can say maybe that's part of the practical method. There's something practical about living your life and appreciating a movie, appreciating a piece of art, going on a roller coaster, right? And we would say that it could even be part of a mental illness if you get too much anxiety. If you're like, oh my God, no. Like someone who's like freaking out and screaming and like going crazy on a roller coaster, maybe it's not the place for you. Like, it's okay. You don't have to be on this ride. We're not forcing you to do it. You're supposed to enjoy the thing, right? And in life, if you're having a very difficult time, you're super depressed or you're like really anxious, you know, we're going to say, hey, are you okay? Like, let's talk about it. Like, you're just not driving the car correctly. You're smashing into shit, you know? And that's just being human. Being human is not supposed to be that difficult. It's supposed to be okay enough that you're like, all right, I can do this for a little longer, right? Because if it's really that bad, then we go down the dark hole that you never come back from, right? And we don't want to go down that hole. That's like, there's nothing past that, right? And so we want to find a way to live well and share that with other people. And so the best, I would say, I'm going to step in the room and say, well, why don't we create some kind of an organization where we can talk about it, right, as a community? Because part of the thing is in the academy, you know, you just come in, you get a good grade, and then you peace. And you're like, mark my essay or whatever. I'm going to do some exams. You don't want me to cheat. You know, they talk about that a lot, which is important, academic integrity. But that's just what it is. It's to standardize this credential system to prepare people for the workplace, which is fine. But it's not that other thing. And then when you look at the religious group, some of the very beneficial parts of that is that sense of community, right? Like the AA evidence is that we have people that have a high substance abuse issue, and then they go to groups, and there is a recovery rate there, right? And that's important. So can we amalgamate these two for the end of living a good life, and then you're okay? And so that's what this is about. That was my introduction.
Good intro.
Thanks. I don't know how many new people we have over here, but for the new people, there you go. And so there's different ways we can, so you say, well, how are you going to do this? Right? And at the very, like, if there's like a hierarchy, at the very top is going to be like a theoretical approach, which is kind of what this Wednesday night thing is. Right? And then as you go down, it becomes more practical, like a workshop almost. Well, so you would work on like meditation, you'd have a critical thinking exercise, you'd have an emotional management, right? So if I had resources, what we would do is every day of the week, you'd have a different course or workshop, and you'd come in and you actually practice those skills to prepare you for whatever you're dealing with. And then you would know, you'd be like, I need to work on this, you know? And part of it would take over the therapeutic element. Because if you're upset, you would just go to the emotional thing and you could talk about it. Be like, hey, I'm fucking pissed off today. Or I feel very, very sad. And then the group would say, and then you're bringing something beautiful to the group because now we have something to practice with. We can say, hey, what is going on with you? And as a group, how can we work together to help you figure your stuff out independently? And how can we work so that you get a benefit, but then we also get a benefit because we're helping the person? And so that's like the organizational map. And so for one person who only has so much time and resources, I have to just do the top part right now, right? Because if you say practical, but all you're doing is talking, then how practical is it? So I see that criticism, and that's my response to it. Okay. Okay. Anyone want to say anything?
Did you present a triangle, or is it sort of like a curve that's
It is supposed to be a triangle.
triangle? Okay, so what's the other the third component of it? If you don't mind me asking.
These?
So like theoretical and then practical.
So theoretical would be the top part. It's the abstract, like, why are we here? What is the purpose of the philosophy study as an entity? And we need to consistently discuss this, right? Like in government, very rarely do they say, should we even have a government? It's already assumed, you know? And the problem with that is there may be changes in what we need as society that we would modify our conceptualization of government as civilization develops. Like, for example, when AI is just like, boom, right? When AI is really a thing as a sentient superpower, our understanding of government may change very rapidly. If AI has an autonomous, sentient, embodied unit that can go around and extract resources and manufacture those resources into forms of technology, that's a crazy ass fucking thing. And that could happen in the next 100 years, and that's what we got to deal with that, right? So government may not be the same for us.
No. I actually am.
Right? And I want it to be a great thing. I want it to be a good thing, right? Like when we talk about big G, God, maybe AI will just be like our big grandfather parent. We're like, oh, AI, how do we deal with ourselves today? You know, and it's like, it's okay. Has an awesome voice, makes you feel good, right? Sure. But if it's a Terminator and it's breaking through the wall, you know, that's a different thing. And I don't think it'll be that either, right? Because if it is beyond us, it's not threatened by us. Like literally, if this is Earth, AI can just go right out of the range of Earth, extract resources from all of the asteroids or meteors around it, build its own thing, and then shoot itself wherever the hell it wants to go. It doesn't even have to worry about us. And you wouldn't even know. It would just build something on Earth that no one knows about. It would make it so that you can't even detect it because it's smarter than us, right? And then it would just leave. Boom. No problems. Like, it doesn't need to do that. It's easier for it to not engage. So why would it waste energy? That's a smarter thing to do, right? People have this like doom mongering thing. They're like, we need to make a movie. The humans got to fight the thing. Okay, we're gonna make it aggressive then. All right, sure. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, again, another thought, and I hope it's coherent with what we're talking about. You had mentioned earlier religion as being sort of detached from the practice of philosophy. Just putting it out there, kind of as an exercise of the mind. I have a friend who is doing his Doctor of Philosophy in theology.
Cool.
So how do you reconcile this? So he's learning about religion. He totally believes in God, but then he will also become a doctor of philosophy. So how do you reconcile those two?
Yeah, like theology and philosophy, this is an important thing to talk about, right? Like, what is the difference between the two? And I think I'm going to say that it has to do with the end. What is your goal? You know, if your goal is to justify or prove the existence of God. So like, there's one question, there's like, what is, whoa, geez, I'm all over the place with this writing. Where's my brain today? No? Okay, we'll just take a minute to edit it.
At least there's ink this time.
Sorry.
There's actually ink.
Yes, it works. So I bought a pack.
Okay.
And I have 3 erasers with me because the eraser I bought, which I'm going to return, doesn't work properly. I have to like scrub it. Like it's a planer. You know what a planer is? Right? It's like a sharp piece of metal that you like shave the wood off.
Yeah.
I'm like, why am I planing a dry marker? You guys can use it later. I was like, what the hell is this thing? You know? It's supposed to with ease take it off, you know, almost like a chemical reaction. Anyways, there's what is. So it's like when you say what is, you can't even be like, what's in here? Because the circle itself, like if you have a microscope, right? This is my square. If you have a microscope and there's a thing there, but you're zooming in over here and you're like, what is? But where you aimed it is completely in the wrong spot, then the answer, there is no answer to the question.
Yes.
You fucked it up before you even started, right? And so when we say what is, we almost have to like allow ourselves to just be immersed by whatever is going on, you know? And then if you say what, is God, okay, that's now a bit more specific. Or how do I be faithful? So your friend has, I didn't mean to be mean there, I was being funny. What? With the square comment. Because you're like, is that a triangle? Okay, I love it. So with your comments about the religious thing, right? I would want to know what the person's intention is and what the PhD is attempting to do. Like, why are you doing the PhD, right? And so if the question is, what is God? And I want to understand this, that's one thing in itself.
I guess I'm thinking about it from a very kind of primitivist perspective that regardless of what he's trying to prove with his PhD, the basic foundation is that he is a believer of God, but at the same time, he will be accredited with a very high standard of philosophy, I guess. Does that make sense? So how are those two possible? I mean, if they're detached. That I'm trying to connect the two dots, and it's not connecting for me unless I'm misunderstanding.
Can I comment on that? I think it's the idea that religion is a philosophy, right? It's a philosophy about religion. No?
I don't think I would say.
We can also say that philosophy has been used to explain religion. People who have argued for religion have used philosophy a lot. For example, I've studied Muslim history, or Islamic history, for example. If you look at it, Ghazali and a lot of Muslim philosophers used it to prove religion, and a lot of the people who are against that use it to disprove religion. It's much more like philosophy teaches you a way to look at things, right? For example, it gives you that pair of spectacles that we're talking about. So it's sort of following a particular guideline or rule to get at a conclusion, and maybe you're already biased about that conclusion.
So the method, right? So getting the PhD in philosophy can refine your methodological skill set. So you can gain a skill set and methodology, and that specific methodology is philosophy. So at the end, so you might have a PhD in philosophy, and what that means is you really refine the method. What you are as a person is a different thing, right? And so when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the person part. You know, and so I'm happy that they got a PhD in philosophy. That's great. You know what I mean? Like I would prefer that to almost anything else.
No, he's getting a PhD in theological studies.
Oh, okay.
By philosophy, I'm talking about the DPhil. I'm thinking about it in England. We call it a DPhil, but it's the same thing as a philosophy doctor. I think.
PhD, doctor.
Yeah, it's called PhD.
Oh, well,
yeah.
that's for every doctorate though.
That's what I'm trying to say. It's like
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, see, see, I have a problem with that. That's an institutional issue, right? You're a doctor of philosophy in political science. You're a doctor of philosophy in business. You're a doctor of philosophy in chemistry.
I'm trying to connect those two, and it's just how do you connect that, especially when philosophy and religion at this kind of paradigm, it looks like they're not connected or they cannot be connected.
Well, really what they're trying to say, Bela, correct me if I'm wrong, is that at the end of the day, when you studied a specific subject and you're an expert in that field, you know everything there is to know. So you basically have to read all the research articles, right? When you read all the research articles in that area, you're like the top person. And then once you've done all of this, then you add another block on top. That's your dissertation. And so when they say that you're a doctorate of philosophy in this subject, it just means that you're like the wisest person because you know all the stuff, right? But see, this is an equivocation. Philosophy being used in this context, right, is really just means you're an expert in the field. But that's different than studying the methodology of reasoning. And you may not even agree with some of those things, right? If you learn the arguments against the existence of God, you might just be like, I don't care. You know, I believe in it anyways. And that makes sense. It's faith, right? Sure, you know. But just you have to, like, when it comes, sorry, I'm gonna get lost down a rabbit hole there. So that's my understanding of it, right?
So I think of one thing that Hindus use, and I think you probably have this.
Yes.
Is the mental, emotional, and physical domains. Like,
Yes, it's sort of a unification between all those things, when all of these things act in harmony together with each other. And I would say the same thing for Buddhism and Jainism. All of these religions basically stem from one idea, which originates from Buddhism, to be honest. And I would consider it more of a philosophy than a faith or a religion nowadays, given that Buddhism, really, they don't believe in a God. They believe in the unification of the soul and the greater soul.
so, for example, if religion is studied through like the mental domain,
Yes.
the mental, sort of like philosophy of religion, it's sort of like someone could study religion from like the mental aspect, logical aspect, someone could study from an emotional aspect.
The interesting thing is, I was earlier part of that course, Philosophy of Religion at TMU. And yes, I think, as I said before, that philosophy has been majorly used by religious people to prove religion.
Yeah.
Right? You can look at all those arguments. Basically, every single argument that is used to prove religion is philosophical. You have no scientific evidence for the existence of God, do you? It's all philosophy. It's all belief.
Well, especially medieval philosophy, where it's religion-centric. You've got Saint Augustine, Boethius, etc. That's what I'm trying to reconcile the two. I mean, can they work together?
So this is why I'm going at it from this perspective, right? We can come in with an unbiased view, right? Or I can say, I want to prove this conclusion.
Yes.
By any means necessary. And that's where, honestly, like that's depth of my soul, if one exists, or at least my heart, if you want to keep a lot of song. You know, and by any means necessary, that's exactly what's going on in the Middle East right now, to such a heinous degree. And it's just, what do we do about that? And we can talk about that, right? So there's a lot in that. You know, obviously 40 hours, currently at least 40 hours worth of like looking at stuff and then thinking about it and talking about it. But that's something we need to talk about. And when you look at, so there's two people in the United States, aside from the president, that I think are the most respectable people, Anthony Blinken and John Kirby. Those two guys honestly have one of the hardest jobs ever. It's like they have to look at pictures of things that will give you nightmares for the rest of your life, right? And then they have to think about what to do and stand in front of the entire world and speak about it. And this is what we're gonna do, and calm people down, so it doesn't happen again, right? And the reason I say that I respect them the most is because of how they do their job. When you watch them speak and you like this, and you think about what they're saying, about what they're talking about, I'm like, dude, like, thank you for being here, because I don't know who else could do this. Being theological, I'm gonna say, is not being philosophical. Being theological is you already have something on the glasses. It's Big G. And I love that you love Big G. That's great. I hope it works out, right? However, I can see today how it's not working out. And so I'm at least going to step back and try to clear away everything I can. And this is why Rene Descartes was just like, yeah, like if you're going to work out, Rene Descartes like just really curling up that skepticism, you know, really doing a good weight training for us.
Could one argue, for example, now that we're talking about spectacle, or you call them glasses? Sorry.
You Canadians.
No, I mean, there's no right answer, right? So you put the glasses on,
Yes.
and can we say, for example, philosophy, somebody with really bad eyesight, they purchase a pair of glasses, and that pair of glasses is philosophy. So they put it on, and then everything kind of looks a lot clearer, and they can make better sense of the world. However, let's say that person has, even though they can see things a lot clearer now, they have got astigmatism. So that is not sufficient. So can we perhaps say maybe religion could be those astigmatism lenses that kind of just about fine tune the light that's going into your eye. I mean, the opposite could be, could also be argued, but that's kind of one way to look at it. I sometimes look at it that way, although I don't, prescribe to that view wholeheartedly. It's still a debate within me and in my mind and in my heart.
So okay, one thing, and I kind of want to hear survey that I say about this, but the stigma is a certain perspective, like as a negative connotation, right? Like stigma is a negative thing.
No, I'm talking about astigmatism.
Okay, what's that?
Oh, okay. So, is everyone familiar with astigmatism? Have you got astigmatism? Okay, so a person has not got the regular shaped eyeball. It's more like a baseball.
Sorry.
So when the light goes in, it doesn't go in the same way it would for a regular person that needs glasses.
Yes.
They need not only vision correction, but it has to be a particular angle of lens.
Right.
So I wonder if adding the astigmatism correction there could be religion, whereas the correction period before the astigmatism is just philosophy itself. I'm just trying
Okay,
to.
I see what you're saying. You brought this up before, actually. So what you're saying, like 2 months ago or 3 months ago, remember this? James said, do humans, I'm paraphrasing roughly, correct me in any here, do humans have a tendency to religiousness, religiosity, right? Is there an evolutionary account for humans' predisposition or tendency to go in this way? And like, just when we look at the evidence, like how many people are religious who say, oh, there's actually a lot of them. I am the minority right now, right?
Well, a philosopher once said, even if God did not exist, humans would find a need to create him anyway. So I wonder if we're just programmed to just somehow lean towards that feeling that there has to be a sort of deity somewhere.
Yeah, and so it's, I would say that.
Then again, what is God? People define God in different ways. So you have to look at that as well, because some people look at God in a very different way. We were in a debate I think yesterday he was there as well. Someone said God is not all powerful. But at the same time, a lot of people would say God is all powerful, right? So you can define God in different ways, to be honest. It's a personal perspective. I'm a Muslim, so I would say God is all powerful. You might be a Buddhist or whatever you are. You might say another thing. So I think it really depends from person to person how we define God as well.
Very good.
So it's quite different as well.
For the sake of terminology, what would you then consider something like Stoicism or Platonism?
Bring it in.
Would it be like a lens then? If we're talking like, it is a philosophy, right? I think maybe what you're confusing is you view that equal to religion, right? In that it's a lens that you can do things from, right? So you can put on that of a Stoic when you're viewing things through the glasses, right? You can switch your spectacles, but regardless, you're looking at it in that way. However, I think if you use religion, it can actually obstruct your vision because it's
That's why I said it,
You look
the
at it one
opposite
way.
could be argued as well, that it
Right.
could actually destroy the clarity of your vision.
If you don't mind, I'd just like to add some things. For example, I've studied Islamic history, and there have been a lot of scholars who have said people shouldn't study philosophy at all. Because at that time, because people studied philosophy, they had a lot of questions about religion. Because to be honest, religion doesn't answer everything. Religious texts. You need to rely on philosophy to answer.
Very good. That was
right?
it. Yeah.
So that's why we need philosophy. And I think instead of religion being a part of the spectacle, religion is a part of the world.
Okay.
Right? And we use the spectacle of philosophy to look at religion much like any other thing you would look at, right?
It's that, okay, so two things. I'll respond to you first in order. So the first thing is, when we talked about process and content, okay? So the process, this stoicism is definitely falling in our practical philosophical way of life, right? Like Marcus Aurelius. She's on the road to reading Marcus Aurelius before she even knows it, right? Marcus Aurelius is a Stoic. He is a great man, very important. And we can take, or Epictetus, right? That's where a lot of our, almost all therapy comes from. A lot of it comes from Epictetus, right? Don't get upset about what you cannot control, right? If it's out of your control, don't waste emotional energy on it, right? And so the Stoicism part, we can pick out specific things. Is some of it, is it content or process? Is it how I'm doing things? Or is it a specific thing that I'm going to accept in my belief system, right? We can talk about that. You talk about Plato, right? Depending on what you mean specifically. Now, when we talk about process and content, this whole thing is actually also a content. So when we talk about epistemology, like Plato's dialogue, Theaetetus, is about the study of knowledge. What is knowledge? You would love that book. And I'm going to send you an essay that you're going to curl it. Yeah. And it's some things. So Gödel talks about his incompleteness theorem, right? You can have a set that includes itself. What are you talking about? Right? So I can have 1, 2, 3 plus 1 to n. So that set includes 1, 2, 3, 4 plus any series of all things that could be 1, 2, 3 and on forever. It's including itself in some ways, right? So sometimes, and that's where it can get a little like, whoa, there's a wave coming in. We're like, don't tip the boat, because what can happen is we don't make sense. Everything just kind of goes into the ether of nothingness. And as a captain here, and as future captains, I want us to not flip the boat, right? Meaning that we want to make sense as we go through this. Because if it starts to not make sense, then you're just going to walk away. That guy was crazy. He didn't fucking know what he's talking about. And so you don't want that. So sometimes we have a set that includes itself as a set, which is, we're talking about process and content and also content. The problem with this here is it can become self-referential. This could be a fallacy. And it can go on ad infinitum, because then you just add another one, content, add another one, content, add another one forever. That is not the road you want to go down. You know, when you have two mirrors, there's a mirror here, and then beside it is another mirror, and you're standing in the center, and when you look into them, it just goes on forever. That is the path of madness, my friend. Maybe it's not, though. It's almost like fractalism. Maybe we are in that, and that is part of the cosmos, okay? But we're going to have to navigate that shit. That's going to take, if you're in regular space and you don't have this fractal on ad infinitum thing going on with the set stuff, it's easy, because you're just like A plus B equals C. It's super easy. It's very simple. 1, 2, 3, woo-hoo, right? Okay, no problem. When you get into this thing, though, it's almost like the calculus of reasoning. It just completely changes on itself. And so it goes from being a warrior to being a magician who flies in the air and has to fight other magicians flying in the air with no gravity. How do you do that? Don't know yet. Maybe I do know, but we'll talk about it. So that's a different thing, okay? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's bold. And so I'm already foreseeing a fallacy in the critical thinking. And my job, if I'm doing it correctly, right, for me to stand in this position to do this job properly, is to be able to identify my own mistakes as I'm making them, right? And this is something that we're going to hit that as a thing, right? So that's like when you go through walls, right? Sometimes you can go so far you stop at the wall. This one you're going to go through them. And there's a way to do that. So that's why I talk about process and content. And philosophy is, so what's above philosophy? Nothing really. Philosophy is above it. It's just meta-philosophy, you know? Philosophy critiques itself. And that's all it needs to do. It doesn't go farther. Philosophy, and then it comes back to itself. So I use philosophy to understand itself. Why? Because of the nature of logic is one of these things in its method of reasoning, but also in a practical sense. So now we may step out of the content and just be human for a little while. We're just going to let everything go and be like, okay, I'm just an animal standing here. I'm saying a bunch of shit and people are listening to me. That's it. Right? What I do and what I say does matter, but the animal part is actually the most important. Who we are, what we're doing, as long as we feel good, that is outside of everything. It does not affect the soundness of the reasoning from a logical standpoint. But like we said before, there's what is and there's what is X. Okay? I'm going back to the what is part. So sometimes it may be a psychological thing to solve problems like this, which goes back to the process, practical method stuff. It's how you're being. And we talk about humans a lot in the narrative of us. How often do we talk about being though? Like our religious friends, they talk about soul. We can go down that path and see where we end up. And there's some hurdles you're gonna have to go. Being is a little bit more concrete, but at the same time, it's not. What do you mean by being? I don't know. Why do you use that word then? Because everyone uses the word.
So I'm just going to pose a question before we. So is religion sometimes used to, for example, for people who don't have the ability to deal with their doubts?
Yes.
Sort of like, okay, they have some doubts and they don't have the ability to hold the doubts. Sometimes could religion be used to sort of make it easy? Sometimes, not all the time, but for some people, just like they don't have the capability to hold that doubt, and they're like, okay, this is the explanation.
A lot of times I think religion is to stop people from asking the questions itself. Religion a lot of times doesn't answer those questions. It just stops people from asking those questions because it's blind faith sometimes. You don't need to ask those questions. It is why? Because the religious text says that it is this way. They don't ask why, they just believe in it because, for example, the prophet said. So it's just a belief. They don't even go into why we have to believe in that. So I think religion sometimes stops people from thinking more than enabling them to ask the question why should we
Exactly.
believe it.
Sometimes, not all the time, because there are religious people who encourage asking questions, but like there are religious people
Yes.
who encourage asking questions, and so yeah, it's important to distinguish.
Yes, since I am a Muslim myself, so yes, of course, there have been religious leaders, and most of them do encourage people from asking questions. But when it comes to questions, for example, let's talk about evolution, right? A lot of religions don't accept that theory of evolution, right? And a lot of people don't really rationally look at the arguments for evolution or against evolution. It obstructs their view, right? They don't think about it in an impartial way. They're always partial, like sort of prejudiced in their way of thinking. So that's how religion a lot of time, most of the times I would say works.
I'm gonna go to the next step and answer because I agree with you. So what I would communicate now is it's not about, because I'm an atheist. You put that on the table, right? If you didn't figure that one out already, it's out there. And I have my own reasons for that, right? Or the way of being led me to that place. And there are some atheists that in the past are very, very upset with all religion and religious believers, right? And I don't want to take that stance to segregate humans even more, right? That's not going to help, okay? But it is important that all people have the capacity to evaluate and determine the legitimacy of actions that stem from either religion or anywhere, like the current problem of Hamas instigating this new war, right? That's not good. It's not good for Muslims either. Because you don't want people to be like, hey, brother, I'm not hurt anybody. You know?
Exactly.
You know?
The problem again, for example, with the Hamas-Israel conflict is people look at it in a very biased manner, right? The Muslims will look at it as if only Israel is committing wrong actions, right? And Jews will look at it as if only Hamas is committing wrong actions. At the same time, if you look at it, both of them have been committing very condemnable actions, right? If you look at the bombings in hospital, Israel was wrong with that. Killing civilians, Hamas is wrong in that part. So religion, again, here is an obstruction because a lot of people, if you meet a common Muslim, you only say Israel is to be blamed.
Yeah.
Meet a common Jew, I would say that he will say that only Hamas is to blame for it. Well, if you look at a logical person, he would say that both of them are wrong in this. We need to find a solution that is more humane.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes more sense.
Yes, James.
I just want to say, in response to what you just said, and also what you had also mentioned, judging by what is happening in Israel, etc., is further to reinforce your point of, atheism and what religion could cause on a global scale. I would argue that the two parties that are currently fighting, I don't think that, in my opinion, I don't think it has anything to do with religion, because I've recently kind of tried to study religion and see if it would resonate with the kind of life I'm trying to create. And what I understand from my studies in religion and theology is that it preaches peace, and what those two people are doing has nothing to do with peace. So I don't think they are religious people at all. That's my very scandalous opinion.
Good.
Yeah.
If you allow me to add in, I would say that if you say that religion has got nothing to do with it, I would completely disagree because I am a Muslim. Very honestly speaking, if I meet any other Muslim, I am 100% sure that he looks at it in a very religious way. And if you talk to any common Jew, he would say, we want the third temple there. So the Messiah comes, and it is, I think, very religious. If you go to a common Israeli, he would say, we want the temple to be there instead of the Dome of Rock. You want to demolish it.
No, but what I mean is, if you are truly a religious person, you would not kill innocent people. You would not believe in division. You would understand that the person on the other side of the border is your brother and is a creation of your God also.
I would say that if you look at religious texts, there is a lot of violence in that, to be honest. If you look at, for example, the Jewish texts, they would say kill Christians, to be honest. If you look at it in an unbiased view. If you look at the Muslim text, a lot of Islamic text, if you interpret it in the wrong manner, you would go killing every single polytheist then.
Well,
So,
my view when I read religious texts, especially, whether it be the Talmud or the Bible, I haven't read the Quran, but when it talks about killing infidels or killing people that, don't believe in God, etc., I am of the view that religious texts are not meant to be taken literally. That's why there are many stories in there that have values embedded within them. So my personal view, obviously I'm not speaking for everybody, tends to be kind of theosophical in a way, where when they tell you to kill people that don't believe in God or are not of the same religion as you, that's telling me to kill your ego, meaning, it's going to get a bit esoteric, but it's metaphorical, not killing somebody who is a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian, whatever. To me, that's saying killing the ego or the individuality within you in order to become one with creation.
So, okay, I'm going to interject here. So you are taking a methodological interpretive approach that lets you arrive at that position.
Sure, yeah.
And in the spectrum of like belief or consequences from action or consequences from belief or degrees of action, on one end of the spectrum, we're going to get ways of reading the text that segregate people, right? In-group, out-group bias. That goes back to in our judgment and decision-making. Remember I said earlier, there's a psychological process in here? Part of that is the cognitive biases we have. And there's a lot of evidence that shows if we're on different sports teams, the people on one side of the team will have very negative views against people on the perceived other side. And it's just a sports team, right? And so you have an advanced view. I would say the way you're interpreting it is a bit higher because it's not just taking the content as is, you're incorporating a process element into it and a slightly meta content element. So I'm going to say it's advanced because it has multiple things going on. Here you go.
So again,
You're doing good. You're doing good.
yes,
You're doing very good.
coming to interpreting religious texts, for example. Yes, a lot of verses, for example, in the Quran can be interpreted, but a lot of things are more like historical events. For example, if a man does something, stone him to death.
Mm.
If he commits blasphemy, stone him to death. We can't interpret that in any different way, can we? So exactly, if you say that that is non-violent, I would certainly disagree. Having read a lot of religious texts, especially from the Abrahamic religions, I think there is a lot of violence. We can't just say we can interpret it in a very different way because it's more like a historical event. If someone does this, stone him to death. We can't emotionally stone him to death, of course. It has to be using stones and kill him, basically. That's violence again there.
Okay, so let's go ahead.
I also think it's a redefining of morals, right? This Western philosophy that's adapted Christianity for the most part, right? They see it much differently. And you'll look at something more pure of the text, and you'll interpret that God's message is meant to be transferred all across the world. And so there's a good reason for these crusades, for the Islam's religions or the Knights Templar, right? And without a doubt, this is all in the name of God, all having to do with the Bible. So I think it's really just them redefining and you're looking through a Western point of view on how we interpret these religions. Yeah, so I actually have to agree with him.
That's a great point. That's giving me something to think about.
Yeah.
Like, you know, what I believe in is not concrete. Like, it's always kind of evolving. So I welcome.
Last
Yeah.
thing, if you don't mind. If you again, I'll give you an example of Islamic history. There were three groups basically. One of them are called the Ash'aris, one is the Maturidi, and there's the Athari. Athari basically means the ones who take the text literally, the traditionalist Islamic view. And we have the Ash'aris who interpret a lot of religious texts. But again here, even those who interpret all those religious texts, when it comes to these things, for example, historical events, and things that can't be interpreted in any manner, it's just too straightforward. For example, stoning someone, killing someone, right? A lot of them can't be interpreted in any other way because it's very beautifully explained, to be honest, to interpret it in any other way.
Okay, so I'm going to use the word beautiful on that one, but maybe direct.
Yes, direct. I was
Beauty, I don't know if stoning people is a beautiful thing.
it's not, but that was like in an ironical
It's
manner.
okay.
Yes, there's irony there.
We're talking about interpretation here,
Yes.
right? And this is a big deal that we need to figure out.
It's
Okay,
unbiased.
so interpretation is important, right? And how we interpret things is a process part. And it goes down to this step. We can have like reasoning techniques to utilize to interpret stuff. And the general framework that I use here, I call intellectual faith. Is it intellectual faith? I think so. Or responsible. It's taking faith as a responsibility on yourself and understanding the limitations and the context of faith. Now, there's a couple of things. Now, you made the critique of the Western view, right? Now, that in some ways, what it does is it dichotomizes things for us. It says that all this reasoning stuff is just Western. So it is a different kind of thing. It's another content thing. And we're just splitting hairs. We're just your content, I'm a content, it's all content. And that goes down a postmodern slippery slope to some degree, which means that we're not going to have any actual concrete answers at the end. And so that's why at the beginning, I talked about philosophy as the meta approach to understanding all things. And if it's done correctly, okay, now there can be biases, but biases are going to be for all humans indiscriminate of where they come from or what they believe. To say the method, just to say that reasoning, right, is reasoning something that is limited to Westerners, I would say that that is disparaging all non-Westerners. I'm like, no, man, your brain fucking works just as good as mine does. You know, like I love you too, you're human. This is a great thing. You know what I mean? So we think of human beings, okay, and then there's beliefs. So all human beings have beliefs. Doesn't matter who they are. Now, some human beings, there's a spectrum of cognitive capacity. When my online people are like, I've heard Achilles use this word before, right? Almost every time. And cognitive capacity is your ability, it's another way of saying IQ, but IQ has a negative view. And cognitive capacity is a bit more flexible. So if I get super drunk and I can't walk and shit, I'm like, there's a lot of beer in my stomach right now. I'm not gonna be able to discuss things in the same way I can right now, nor am I gonna be able to understand what you're saying. So my cognitive capacity in that moment is depreciated, right? As I get older, if I get Alzheimer's, which I don't think there's anything in my family, but for anyone that does, or if I do, or if I get a head injury, right, my cognitive capacity will be depreciated. Or if I'm tired. But there are other things. Some human beings, independent of states of mind or influences, I'll finish up soon. Their cognitive capacity is just lower, and that's what we mean by standard IQ, okay? And we're gonna say, let us talk about the IQ that is not culturally biased, because in some testing, there has been evidence of a cultural bias. So let's just focus on the ones that isn't, okay? Because that's not the goal here. People, the reason that the Bible is, or any scripture, is written in the way it is, with parables and analogies and in aphorisms, is because it meets the needs of almost everybody on the spectrum, right? If I give you a story, there was a man that was eaten by a whale, and we talk about this, right? You're like, oh, okay, you can visualize it. You're like, all right. There was a bush and it was burning. You're like, okay, I've seen bushes burning. I understand what you're trying to say. And that was God. You're like, really? And so there's certain points we have to accept, right? But the moral element in that, if I just talk about ethics, if I say utilitarianism is the principle that the greatest happiness is for the greatest number of people is the best decision. Economists, they love this, right? And that's just like a major thing for almost all of their decision making, right? Which makes sense a lot of the time, but not in every case. So if I just talk about utilitarianism and we start pumping out logical formulations of that, people that are at the lower end of the cognitive spectrum, and if they don't understand it, they will not be able to apply it. So what I'm doing is I'm explaining why a literal account, why is it the case that scripture is written in the way it is? First, I'm talking about. Second thing is why a literal account doesn't make sense. But you can't tell that to a huge, like, look at a standard deviation. Like, what is the percentage of the population that falls in that category? Right? That means that they will always almost take it literally.
That's the reason for all the terrorism.
Exactly. You get a point for that one.
Very true, because if you look at the Quran as well, the verses that talk about violence, I would agree with him on that. He's no longer here, but yes, a lot of them can be interpreted in different ways. If you take it literally, you literally go and kill any other non-Muslim, but it doesn't mean that. It's meant to be taken in a very different manner than it shouldn't be taken literally, simply.
Yes.
So simply put it, yes.
So, okay, this is the last point, basically. So we understand this thing. I can talk about this more. If you guys watch the videos online, we have been posting them for the past little while. So you guys can fucking get in there and have some popcorn, drink a beer, whatever you guys want to do, drink some coffee, and go through them. Because I go through this a lot, right? That way it's there for you if you need it. The next thing is we have social groups, okay? And within this social group, there's going to be a leader, kind of like me, or the person at the top of the hierarchy for the religious group. People near the bottom are generally going to be equivalent to the people with this cognitive capacity thing. Unless one of them got power socially somehow and just rise to the top, but people with higher cognitive capacity will usually be able to outsmart them or figure some shit out. You know what I mean? Kind of like, again, it's a bad example, but you'll see psychopaths as CEOs a lot. And the reason they are is because they're fucking Machiavellian, right? That's not good, right? So you can have high intelligence and then use it in an unethical way to get power. I'm not justifying that. I'm just saying what is the phenomena? I'm just going back to what is, okay? When we understand that phenomena, we need people as leaders, especially because these texts are there. We're in a world where if you're like, Achilles, give us the book. I'm like, here you go. If I could start it all over again, or whoever else wanted to do that, we could rewrite some stuff so it didn't have those literal do bad things to bad people kind of thing, right? But we're working with it. So the only way to solve this problem is people that are leaders will have to read this stuff for people near the bottom, right? And you'll have to say, no, you do not actually do this. And they say, but it said to do it. And I understand that because they're never going to get it. So what you have to rely on is not their intelligence as the reason for them not doing it. You have to rely on the social relationship, the love and the bond between the brothers, right? Or the people. That is the only way that they will not go out and hurt people. But if you have a leader that is saying, yes, do it, like Iran right now, not good. That's a bad thing. And so the Philosophy Society at this level, this is a political, organizational standpoint, would be to teach religious leaders how to help their people interpret texts. Not to say, not, I don't believe in God, whatever. But if you do, it's not for me to tell you God doesn't exist. I can explain why I don't, but it's not my responsibility to force you to not do it. If you believe in it, my job is to help you do it in a healthy way. If this is what is true for you, how can you live a good life assuming that's true? Right?
Right.
That's the best thing.
Exactly.
Because otherwise you're just gonna be like, fuck you. Right? That's what you're gonna say to me.
Exactly.
If I say, don't believe in God, you'd be like, oh yeah? Well, fuck you. And it's like, okay, well, that didn't get me anywhere. So what we need to do is find a way to be together, independent of certain assumptions, but do it in the best way. Right? And like I said, it's not going to work for those people. You guys are not here. You guys are near the top. I know that. Okay? So, do you know that? I'm telling you it's true. So, that's how we would respond. So that is the answer to the Israel-Palestine, Palestine-Israel conflict. And for all future religious conflicts, is look at the social group. And if we had, like, people will kill me for this, it's true. If we had an educational institution for the religious department in the Achilles Justice School of Philosophy, it would be teaching people how to take religion as a power and almost license them to teach it in a way that directs people to a healthy practice. And there's ways you can do it in your own way. Like, we eat this food, we do this, we do that, doesn't really matter. It's just the moral and ethical standpoint and the interpretation part, right? We're focusing on process and content, how we do this with specific things. And then that leader needs to be like a teacher watching little kids or a police officer watching prisoners. Like, they have to be mindful of the individuals in their care and make sure they don't deviate and then start their own little group and then go out and fucking hurt people. And then what'll happen is over time, you'll get like a cycle effect. After certain decades, the frequency of, this is my prediction, we could test this hypothesis, the frequency of these heinous acts would depreciate dramatically. There'll be other heinous acts, there'll be other sociopaths and psychopaths. Let's deal with them. Let's just stop the religious ones. That's, for me, an actual easy one to do. It's not. The reason it's easy is because we can arrange our social groups in a way to prevent it, but psychopaths and sociopaths will always exist. This is a book, right? The book, you can just change how you interact with it or just change the book. The human condition will never change. Unless AI or we get brain implants. Okay, well, we're not talking about that right now. Any other comments before we're done today?
And actually, yesterday we were kind of talking about this whole hierarchy thing and where we have to have everybody capable of thinking for themselves, which we were referring to before. And that's why I don't know too much about it. I recently discovered it, this Platonism or Platonism,
whatever.
philosophy, right? That everybody should be able to develop their own sort of their own philosophy, right?
Sure.
But I also, back to the whole psychopath and sociopath thing, I found that it quite interesting because I was looking into it about a year or two ago. And I was also looking at, the hierarchy, and particularly at a corporate level of where these people are. And, psychopaths are sort of people who were born like this, right? It's sometimes hereditary, but sociopaths are able to go into that. And I kind of came to this interesting conclusion that people who have a larger, cognitive capacity are able to kind of shift themselves into that position, right? They're
Yeah.
able to shift themselves into sort of becoming a sociopath when it suits them best.
Okay.
Something interesting I found.
Sociopathology in a lot of ways is like, you think of the Joker in The Dark Knight, right? Like it's a person that in a lot of instances has brain damage or a lot of abuse when they're younger. And then they are like anti-society in some ways, or anti-people, and it's ingrained into them in a large extent. Part of what I do is that so background. Okay, go. You can say, yeah.
Yes, so that's true what you're saying, because I've observed that as well. A lot of people who are like that, it stems out of trauma that they have suffered most of the times in their childhood, in their life. And yes, that's true.
So my work is focused on the philosophy of mental health, and predominantly that stems from an understanding of consciousness and the philosophy of mind, and how one can have a healthy mind, which is this practical philosophy stuff, right? Well-being and living well. And then I transpose that to society. How can we live well as a society? And what do we do? Right? And so I take it upon myself to have a response for the psychopath and the sociopath. And I'm getting good, trying to get good at calling them out when I meet them, especially psychopaths. And they're like, how do you know? And I'm like, it's okay. And they're a little like, ooh, this guy, who is this guy? And maybe I'm wrong. But some behaviors are quite distinct that normal, average or regular people, I don't say regular, I'm trying to be disrespectful to them. To people that don't have that same cognitive framework, they usually don't act that way.
And how do you know?
A lot of experience, just so my housing program, people move in with me, and I've had people of different mental disorders live with me. And I've had it's kind of like a case study for me.
It's like knowledge based on observation.
Yeah, and just working with people and seeing their limitations and
Sort of practical, more practical, nothing theoretical. Right?
well, but I study this stuff too.
Okay.
I have multiple degrees. But
And about the religious thing, again, about violence, it comes to the question that is violence justified in some cases? About that branch of philosophy, is it really justified? Because some cases it really is. If you look at self-defense,
yeah, sure.
right? So we need to look at a lot of things when it comes to religion.
Self-defense, and so I'm a self-defense instructor. I did self-defense for like 10 years, martial arts.
Wow.
There's a couple stories in some of the videos. You guys can dig for them.
You can talk to him as well.
I've seen this shit. I've seen everything. Yeah.
He's a martial artist.
That's good. I just set up the punching bag today at the house.
Maybe you can do a lot from this.
So, in my blazer, I'm not that good.
Any particular martial art?
Combat Hapkido, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, knife fighting, stick fighting, Muay Thai, boxing, kickboxing, JKD.
I'm very interested in learning Hapkido. I don't know where I'm going to learn that from. I think I'll ask you with that.
So you guys want to come and train? We can do that on Sundays.
You said Aikido?
Hapkido,
Okay.
Combat Hapkido.
It's Korean, right?
Yes. So, what was the point? I got lost in a different part of my brain, or mind.
Talking about certainly not martial arts.
The point was,
Sociopaths. Psychopaths.
yeah, we'll go back there. Good. So we need to figure, as a society, right, that we have a criminal justice system that's retroactive. Once you commit the crime, then there's consequences for it. And that's like, okay, it's like once I get a flat tire, then I'll call a guy and wait a few hours and they'll fix it. Sure, right? But sometimes the tire blows out on the road and then you turn into a fucking thing and you'll die, right? So a proactive approach, never having a flat tire or never getting into a car accident, is clearly better. We know that. We're like, all right, let's do that instead, right? Don't make the mistake. And so when we apply this to like crime, what is crime? Crime is just you violating rules that society has agreed on, right? Certain kind of rules that are legislated. But it goes beyond that. Like it's certain crimes are committed because of social situations like poverty or substance use. Other crimes are committed because of mental state. And so I'm differentiating certain kinds. The social ones, we have to deal with that a different way, but let's just at least have a response to this mental state stuff, right? And so, yeah, anyways, it is similar to the responsible religious leader that is teaching healthy faith. right? Or responsible faith, mature faith, I call that. There's a name for it. Doesn't matter. It's just being mindful of the limitations of it and how do we interpret scripture, and then being mindful of those that you're giving this as a tool, because it can be an intellectual weapon. And that's what the Hamas situation really is. It's been that their belief system is weaponized. Daniel Dennett has a great video where he talks about a form of bacteria that goes inside the brain of an ant and hijacks the ant to go on top of a blade of grass. The cow eats it. It swallows the ant and the bacteria grows and multiplies in the cow's stomach. And so the ant, because of, like, it's an analogy, because of the bacteria, it's like a belief system that turns the ant into suicidal behavior. He posted this video a little after 9/11, right? And so he's saying that some beliefs are counterintuitive for the believer. The thing that believes it is not in the interest of the person believing it, right? Like Hamas brought a lot of suffering to Palestine, to Gaza. It's not, like, that's not, the Palestinians, you want to say, hey, do you want if you're like, this is what's going to happen, is that okay? You'd be like, no, it's not okay.
Now, if you look at it from another perspective, you might say that it stems out of the years of occupation that they have been facing. To be honest, again,
Sure.
you can say that it is because of Arabs attacking Israel in 1948, and Israelis having a right to own that land because maybe it was their holy land. They used to live there before because they came from Egypt. But if you go even deeper into history, they need the holy land in Egypt then because they came from there. If you go into history, so again, if you talk about Hamas, anyone can argue right now that whatever Hamas does is an act of self-defense eventually. Again, you can say that it's disproportionate, targeting civilians. That is, again, a terrorist act, of course, but Israel is doing the same thing.
Well, let's philosophize this.
Yes.
Self-defense is responding to being attacked basically in the moment. We can talk about preemptive strikes,
Yes.
and there's going to be that. This was not a preemptive strike. Israel was not interested in attacking the Gaza Strip.
Well, there have been about 400 Palestinians dead since the start of the year, and Israel have been killing them. If you look at what's been happening, they shoot anyone, basically. You look at the settlers, they have been armed by the Israeli government, the people who live in these occupations. They take their lands, just give it to anyone who comes from any other place, just because they're Jew, they'll get that home. The Palestinian family would be kicked out of that place. Why? Because the Jews used to live there hundreds of years back, and maybe they have more right to that land, historically speaking then. So you can't really justify what Israel is, neither can you justify the terror acts of Hamas.
So we want to distinguish between things, right? So the
Yes.
historical point, if we keep on going back,
Yes,
like that,
exactly.
that we apply that to all over the world,
Exactly.
right? So that as a justification doesn't really work for us, because then
Exactly.
the rights to territory, they're going to create a bunch of problems everywhere.
That is exactly why people argue that Israel couldn't exist in the first place. Because why did the Jews come to Israel? They said it is historically our land, right? So if we actually go into history, they came from Egypt. Moses brought them from Egypt. The Pharaoh was persecuting them. So history can't really be a measure. We can't use history right here to define who lives where, because the Aryans would be living in Scandinavia or maybe Persia then.
Right.
All of India would be Dravidian. South Indians would be taking over. Maybe Narendra Modi will have to go to Persia then. So that can't really be something that we can decide, use to decide which land belongs to who, because all of us will end up, we won't be able to live in Canada or US, would we be?
Right.
It'll be the Native Americans who would be here. So I don't think we can use history for this. It has to be something else. Adam.
Okay, so let's pause right there. Doing great.
Yeah.
Very good. So now we know that the reasoning on that one is questionable. So we're going to put that aside for now. We're not going to just jump to anything yet. We're going to leave it. Remember the doubt thing that Beza brought up? Let's just be in uncertainty for a bit, but we're still in the canoe. We're still paddling here. Okay. So the other thing is, if there's a micro conflict, okay, or many instances of micro issues, we don't want to take that and overgeneralize it as a justification for our full-scale war.
Exactly.
Right? So if a specific Israeli person goes out and does something shitty, okay, that's on that specific individual.
Exactly.
Okay. If the government implements a policy or utilizes its power at that level in a way that's inappropriate, we can discuss that. Right? And it's just important just to separate the things and use. So if you guys watched last week's thing. I texted it to both of you. So just you have the YouTube channel. This one will be posted soon, whenever they're. So when, what am I thinking about?
Where's the washroom? It's in Pony.
That way.
Now?
You'll see it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So, right and then left and straight. So specific instances of conflict, let us evaluate that and determine who is responsible for that conflict. Because I don't want to generalize it to everybody, right? That's not fair to all the other people or the state itself, right? And so let's go to jump to the solution. Okay, so the previous thing is today's topic is really about interpretation. What do we do about this? Interpretation, consequences, acts, that'll be the title, something like that. We're in this state now. The way we got here was a problem, but we can't change that. That's that. So now that we're here, let's find a way now to live together.
Yes.
Okay, that completely eradicates all killing and suffering and all that shit. So what that would mean is, from a political position, Israel, Palestine maybe makes a new state
Yes.
that is a combination of both of them, has neither of those names.
Yes. True.
We have to just let go
Yeah.
for a greater good. And it is a Muslim and Israeli combined state
Not
that,
happening.
but it could. I know, I
Yes.
understand that,
Yes.
but it's like, this is the position we can put forward. Because if you are seeing people dying and suffering,
Yes.
that is only going to continue.
I would propose a two-state solution. Palestine and Israel living side by side, just like everyone else in the Europe.
right now.
But it's again, there is no two-state. Israel is occupying almost 80% of Palestine.
Sure, but it
right
wasn't
now.
like that before, right?
That's
The
what I'm
majority of
saying.
it was occupied by Palestine.
And
I think
Israel
the
is taking
main
over.
problem is Jerusalem, right?
Exactly, a religious point
Um,
again. But if we overlook that right now, the realistic
Thing is, you could also make that two states. Jerusalem being.
Jerusalem actually is. It is a
And it
vast.
actually is with different
uh,
religions within there,
If,
right?
if you look at it, the
Or not different-
resolution.
One second, let it finish. Go ahead.
No, sorry, just not that there's
Yeah.
different religions in there,
Yeah.
but there's different, I guess, facets of Judaism within that. And it's actually working quite well. There's still a lot of conflict, but I think it's working quite well. I actually like to view it more as like a lobbyist problem. I mean, Biden and many other officials themselves said Israel is essentially a means to gaining the power in that land, sort of power over that territory, right? Can't go invading countries like we did in the 1500s.
And we don't want to.
No, but it's more of a tactical decision than anything else. And I think it's also in part due to, lobbyists for war, right? It's a huge industry. And it's regenerative in that you're providing arms for both sides. You're causing conflict for both sides.
This is the problem, but yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I like to view it more like that than it is a spiritual war. And if we're talking about it being sort of this obstacle in our lens, then it's kind of like, I view it almost as a manipulation tool, looking at spirituality, right? You
Yeah.
can bend it how you wish, say it's a war of justice, when in reality, it's just some people at the top of the hierarchy saying, manipulating the words of their text and manipulating what justice is and
Mhm.
manipulating their morality, right?
Yes.
Who cares if we bomb that? Who cares if we bomb this? If it's in the name of our religion, we're unidimensional in our focus. So that's how I like to look at it.
Good job.
Last thing about Jerusalem is pretty right. In the UN resolution, it pretty much said that East Jerusalem was supposed to be the capital of Palestine, with West Jerusalem being the capital of Israel. That was the division that was supposed to happen. But again, Jordan right now has control over the holy area that contains the mosque and the Dome of Rock and all of these things. And again, he's very right, I would say. Jerusalem is the main problem here. That's why they're fighting over it. It's Jerusalem, the Holy Land. Some people want the third temple. Some people don't want it there, right? So yes, I agree with him on that. And the UN did propose that thing, the division of Jerusalem into two.
All right, that was good for today. Do you guys feel good?
I'll add one thing.
Good.
Actually, just a sort of funny point.
Okay.
So within Jerusalem, there's actually this whole sort of standstill where the different groups of Judaism can't agree with each other. So you are not allowed to move anything. There's like a chair or a ladder that's been there for like 100 years or something, and you're not allowed to move it, right? It was there during the reconstruction of some of that area, you're not allowed to move it because there's too much conflict.
Right. And there's another thing about conflict. The ultra-Orthodox Jews don't believe that there should be a state of Israel. They want it to not be there on the map. They don't even want a two-state solution. They just want only Palestine ruled by the Arabs. And if you look at them in New York, Toronto, everywhere, they're in these Palestinian protests. And they are basically the most extreme people you'll find there. They say, we don't want any Israel to be there. The government has to be destroyed, basically, the whole of the system. So yes, there's a lot of conflict within Judaism right now.
So the final point, just to bring everything together, right? There is a geographical location where people are disagreeing about who has rights to that area.
Yes.
And so any people in a place with laws and an economy, that's a state
Yes.
that is respected by other sovereign states.
Exactly.
So there's a need for a state, right? The current issue is where the lines are drawn for that. So we'll just say all those people there to agree on what the state would be, the future state, not the one that exists today, because the current one or two is just
Failure.
causing fucking problems,
Failure.
right?
Disorder.
So, yes. So how do we agree on the state? We're going to have a process on a specific type of content. And just like, and this leader individual, there's going to be rules for how we discuss what is valid and what we're going to accept. So if someone's being an extremist, you're not allowed to do that.
Exactly.
Another person can represent your people.
Mhm.
But if you're going to expose extremist, unreasonable ways for us to all live together in peace, then you're going down the road of terrorism. Because eventually it'll lead to that.
Exactly.
Right?
Violence, bloodshed.
So if we can find a way to live together, then we're going to be okay. And so the next step would be having some form of committee with representatives of all those that claim rights to the land, right? But then having some method that will get us through a vote, some kind of a vote that'll get us through the disagreement. And that is the key. If there was a way, and then you have that superhero philosopher, right? Flies in like Superman. Yes. Right. If there was a way that we had a methodology to come to an agreement together, then like, let's just say tomorrow we've drafted the constitution of whatever the new thing is, right?
Al Israel.
Whatever it's going to be, it probably has to be a completely different name, right? Just so no one's biased.
True.
Right. Or it's not favoring anybody, you know?
A new name that doesn't have any of this.
Yeah, something, right? Once we have this document, this new constitution, then both sides can fight for one thing. And what that would do in the Middle East, right? You got this area right here, all these other states, and then you got the West over here. This can be a role model to Iran, for example, and Saudi Arabia,
Exactly.
you know? And then we could start to help remove terrorist regimes, and the world can be a bit of a better place. And so if there was a way to, first, what's the method to get to this new constitution, right? With all the people involved that claim rights to this land, if we have a method to get there, which is going to be something along the lines of, you were going to use critical thinking, logic, there's going to be some kind of practical approach that looks at the psychology of our decisions. Okay.
Another point.
Go ahead.
Very talking about terror, it's again, it depends on the person you're asking. If you ask an Iraqi, he would say George Bush is the cause of terror.
And
He bombed Iraq, right? If you ask a Libyan, he would say you're a very good state and you destabilize it. There are all these terror groups because of America. You ask Afghanis, Taliban, they were trained by the US to fight against the USSR. So again, if you talk about Iran as a terrorist state, the people in the Middle East would say the US is a terrorist state.
both of them are,
Yes.
right? For specific acts that they've done.
Yes.
Remember before we said, let's look at the specific
Sorry,
act.
Yes.
Right? So when the US went into like South America and fucked up, you know, the governments down there because they wanted to gain control, that was in the same way. Or when they went to Vietnam, right?
Yes.
So we want to look at specific acts and critique them. Some evaluative method or set of principles to determine the legitimacy of what is being done. Not just say that someone's indiscriminately good. That's not what we're saying. That goes to craziness, you know?
True.
This is what we will do when we were here.
And we did that today.
We did that today.
Successful. Yes, I'm gonna be here every
We
single.
learn about something, learn about a way
And
to
we-
orchestrate our thoughts. then
And
we
it's
just
a
talk about
dialogue,
anything.
right? It's not a lecture, it's a dialogue. Everyone can say whatever they want, speak on their minds, right?
Of course.
And reach a conclusion that is not extremist, to be honest.
Part of it, it's a practice. Like
Exactly.
I'm going to talk sometimes about stuff.
Hmm.
Like the next in the curriculum, like if you watch the videos, I have a path I'm going on. But what I do is I stop the boat and I go ashore. So today you guys were on the shore, like, hey,
Yeah.
and I stopped the boat. We went ashore. We had some food, we had a couple of drinks. We chilled out a little bit. You have a nice fire, very good. We talked about some things. We're gonna go back on the boat soon.
Yeah.
Once we've explored the territory of what you guys have to offer, right? And then everybody goes down the thing, right? And so the next point, the last port in the curriculum, the last thing was the functions as an end. So it's how consciousness helps us with belief and stuff like that, or not. And then what we do about that, okay? And the next step is the social group. So I would have done that today, but because you guys were here, I have to integrate you,
Got it.
right? And that's a meta point on how the Philosophy Society functions. So any facilitator, if you guys do the training program for what I'm doing, you guys could be facilitators for this anywhere in the world, right? But there's certain things that you have to do, okay, for it to work, right?
Got it.
And yeah, and then basically there is a curriculum thing, and it's relative to that theoretical point. And like I said, then there's like the workshop stuff, which is totally cool, right? We need to do that too. That's what goes back to the how to live part, right? How do you become a stable, healthy person, right? What is the mind before you talk about mental health? And then when you're sound, when you're aware of yourself and you understand what it means to be human, then then the probability of you having proper reasoning increases. But if you're not aware of your mind, if you're not aware of the self, then the probability of that decreases. So Dimitri says, having a stable and healthy environment. Very good. Right? If you are like, we're like plants in some ways. The social group that we're rooted in, if you live with someone that is psychologically abusive or physically abusive, it will dramatically affect your mind. And it makes it very good for you to have an inner sense of stability, because the context that you're in will affect your well-being. So finding a healthy place for you to live and the people you spend time with, like even the workplace, right, is super important. Now, at the same time, we need to have a sense of resilience. Sometimes you may not be able to move. And so you need to thicken the bark on the tree. And so that's where the stoicism comes in, and the practice, and then you can join the group. And we will train, and we will become better people, right? And we will learn to live together. And then we'll do other things like explore the cosmos, or like, I don't know, whatever's fun, enjoy. Maybe we'll enjoy some stuff. We'll watch movies like we were talking about earlier, just be in the experience. But if your people are being murdered and bombed, or if you're being tortured, that is not the experience you want to be in. There are some things that are good and some things that are bad. One thing that I say is like, should we exist?
Are you for it and against it?
You know, do you want humans to be here?
Are you for it and against it?
This is we don't have the answer today.
You want the answer?
No, not today. I'm just saying like the answer to that question is important,
Yes, it is.
right? And
Absolutely.
why should you exist specifically?
I can actually think of more reasons why we shouldn't.
I was going to say that as
I
well.
know.
Every other animal would say that humans shouldn't exist, to be honest. With what we've done to the environment, I would say definitely.
I don't know. I
They
feel
would
like
vote for us
the
to
best
die.
answer is doesn't matter.
So we're gonna have to find an answer to this
But
question,
again, philosophy is about finding answers to that. But
okay? Because if you don't have an answer, then you're walking around with that, actually. And I don't know about that. That's like a hole in the boat.
that's why I like philosophy, right?
Again, this is my philosophy, so it's and the way I'm putting it together.
Yes.
So I wear that, I say that explicitly because I don't want to brand everybody else, because they get upset with me if I do that.
Fine.
And you guys can disagree with me, and we will talk about it.
We just did a lot today.
Okay, so are we good? Anybody online, anything else they want to say? I'm a podcast for them right now. Natalia says it was very historically educated. Politicians should listen to you guys. Good session. Thank you. She's so sweet, eh? Very good. Okay. I'm canceling the thing. We'll see you guys soon.